Okay, thanks for coming out. I'm Dave Hoekstra. I wrote this book, Beacons in the Darkness, but more important, we started putting this together, realized it was 50 years that we have our staff members from Smoke Signals here. Far right. And it's interesting, everybody's pursued a career in journalism, class of 73. Steve Lord, on the far right. Our advisor, who put up with a lot of stuff, Dr. Marilyn Hollman. And Donna De Falco, who was my sounding board as we were putting up. So I'm just going to do a little setup, and then Marilyn's going to run the panel.
Just for a sound, please make sure that the microphone doesn't move around too much.
Yeah. And I'll be moving the microphone to you guys for questions. So I did the book, several years ago, I did a book on Midwest supper clubs, and the book did okay, did well. And what got me in that book was the commitment that multi-generational families had in keeping these businesses, these independent businesses alive. So I've kind of used that in themes of things I've written and things I've done. I wanted to know how that would apply into small town. It started with small town independent newspapers. I mean, the book goes off, we have the Chicago Reader in there, we have a newspaper in Charleston, but it really started with a 4 or 5 generation newspaper in Hillsborough. So I kind of use that same template. It's really a collection of oral histories and the struggles these newspapers have to stay alive today. So yeah, we were all class of 73. We were all fellow staff members at Smoke Signals. And I'll give a little bio intro here of everybody, and then you can take over with the questions.
Tell them to change smoking. Remember, some of you remember that Naperville Central were the Redskins at one time. And a few, how many years ago, 25 or at least 30 maybe. Obviously, people were concerned about that. Can you hear me? Okay, we're concerned about the name, and there was a lot of Michael and I, my husband and I, went to the meetings, school board meetings, which were full. I hadn't seen that since 1973, when there was a certain citizen who was out banning books. Does any of this sound familiar? Trying to ban books, although she didn't succeed. Anyway, now I forgot where, you have to excuse me. Oh, Smoke Signals. And so I remember, I think these folks and other staff members said they didn't like the name. They thought it was silly. It had been around for probably 30 years. I don't know when it started. And we didn't change it. Finally, there was a sea change. The chairperson retired, and the new one was a big journalism buff. And because she had done one at Elmhurst, which won all sorts of prizes. And so she put a lot of emphasis on the newspaper. And I had stopped doing advising. So she chose a younger woman to do it, who was very successful. And immediately they changed the name before they ever published to the Central Times. So, which was the right, I think it was the right thing to do. And that's why when he talks about Smoke Signals, that's a past artifact of the bad past, I guess.
Thank you. And then on that note, I want to do it.
He's not.
So I'll just read this and then we'll be on. Donna De Falco grew up in Naperville and attended Naperville Central High School, where she worked on the school paper with me and Steve Lord. She received a bachelor's degree in literature from Sangamon State University, now the University of Illinois at Springfield. She has worked as a reporter for the Aurora Beacon News, Catholic Explorer, Downers Grove Reporter, and the Naperville Sun. She was lead writer for 11 years on Naper Settlement's award-winning marketing reports. Steve Lord, this guy. He was my best, Steve and I, we could go on all night about some of the stuff we did.
Yeah, it's another program.
I'd say we were a little immature, but we had a lot of fun. Anyway, Steve Lord grew up in Naperville and attended Naperville Central High School, where he worked on the school paper with me and Donna. He is a graduate of the University of Missouri and has worked at the Aurora Beacon News, Chicago Tribune for more than 45 years. And you started at 10 years old, right?
Yeah, it was a prodigy.
Yeah. He has won numerous regional and statewide awards, including 4 Peter Lissigo Awards from the Chicago Headline Club. Dr. Marilyn Hollman, to my right, began reading newspapers in Iowa and has been reading them ever since. She graduated from the University of Iowa. Are you following them, like Caitlin Clark? She's a hell of a basketball.
Oh, she's a great, it's very interesting. Well,
This is informal. And we only have 50 minutes to go. So she graduated from the university. She really is good.
Oh,
It's like
yeah.
Nola
40
Yeah.
40 points and a triple
I
double.
watched that game. Let's talk about
Michael
that. She graduated from the University of Iowa, moved to the western suburbs of Chicago to teach. She began teaching English and journalism at Naperville Central High School and also taught at Purdue University Hammond and the University of Montana. She has an MA from DePaul University and a PhD from Northwestern University. She lives in Naperville, and Michael is in the back, her husband. There, so thank you for coming. Says here, I grew up in Naperville and spent 30 years as a staff writer for the Chicago Sun-Times and began my career at the Aurora Beacon News. I've written several books, and like I say here, you can read more about me if you buy my current book, which is over there. And we have changed. Anyway, I'm almost done with my part. One cornerstone of my book is that to understand a community newspaper, you need to understand community. And the idea for that sense of place is becoming more distant in our modern world. In a 2009 cover story for Harper's Magazine, Richard Rodriguez wrote, "When a newspaper dies in America, it is not simply that a commercial enterprise has failed, a sense of place has failed." And again, that's what I've tried to do in the things I've done in the past is talk about community, sense of place, and how important that is. So you want to start with the questions? Changes?
I just want to tell you one more thing about him. He came into journalism class, he was a sophomore, I think. And Becky Irwin, who is now a professor in Japan, anyway, and has lived there for a long time, was the editor. And so we assigned Dave, I think it was his first story. We then had such a thing as wrestling queens, the wrestling. You were one?
Yeah.
Oh. Anyway, back when wrestling was really wrestling at Central, anyway. So she assigned it to him to do, and we thought we'd just get, so-and-so and so on a list, and there would be a photo, and when was the contest or the vote going to be and whatever. Well, we got this real news story. I mean, 2 pages, page and a half. And Becky and I looked at each other and we went, but you didn't know that. But I've never forgotten that moment. Anyway, that's another thing about Dave, that he also helped me with my dissertation because he was a source for it, which brings me to a subject about gathering news, which we need our other people to help us with. So, Donna, how is gathering information? Because you do the same thing with the settlement as you did when your newspaper work. How did you gather news, and did it evolve over the years?
Well, it definitely did, because Steve hired me to be a part-time reporter at the Aurora Beacon News. And I covered the Tri-Cities, St. Charles, and Geneva and Batavia. So I'm forever grateful to him for doing that. And that started me on my journalism career again after being a stay-at-home mom for 10 years. So, but when I was an education reporter at the Naperville Sun, we had fabulous communication directors. And at 204, it was Janet Bulio, and at 203, it was Malia Smith. And they would send us information. So in addition to getting their press releases, they would call us, and of course, we would be covering the school board meetings and things like that. So we had a constant supply of information. Because back in 2000, there wasn't that much social media. I mean, we still got our information the old-fashioned way. It was when I went to Naperville Settlement is when I noticed how things were changing in the news industry. Because at first, we would fax our press releases out, and then we would send them via email. And eventually, we started posting them to the online portals at the Sun, at the Naperville Convention and Visitors Bureau, and places like that. So anytime there was an online portal, we would be able to post our information, which is great when you're in marketing because then you can control your message. But it was a lot more work. But also then it was more with social media. So we had a Facebook page, eventually Twitter, and then Instagram. And of course, Naperville Settlement is perfect for Instagram with all the photos and things like that. And then we would also be updating the website on a regular basis because we found that so many more people were driven to our website to find out information about our special events and things like that.
Steve, did you have, well, one of the things, did you probably don't use the phone as much as you used to when you started. You probably use either your cell or you write, talk about how you
Yeah,
actually talk to people and your sources.
well, when you're trying to gather news, you'll use whatever you have to use, but you're right, I don't talk on the phone. This is a funny thing, when I started in the Beacon News newsroom, everything was done on the phone. And I mean, everything, they kind of frowned on you even leaving the office. I mean, every time you would start to leave, it was sort of like, where are you going? And I thought, well, I'm a reporter, I'm going out to where the things are, isn't that? But it was very odd. It was like you go to your meetings or you just sit here on the phone and, I was assigned to cover Naperville. This is my first thing. And because of that, I was one of the few guys who kind of had license to leave the building more. Now, over time, that changed as the Beacon News, in the time I was there, and you heard I've been there a long time, got much more professional and much more professional management. And so that changed. They realized reporters shouldn't be sitting around the office all day. So, I gather, and I still gather from a lot of sources, but you're right, a lot more email. And I think one of the big ways news gathering has changed, when I was first covering Kane County, the Kane County Board, I was in the auditor's office almost every other day. He and I kind of forged this bond. I remember him taking me back into these stacks of records, and we're looking up the sheriff's travel records, for instance, and things for a story I was working on, and I would see the actual documents. Now, there's such a high reliance on freedom of information. That's the first fallback. When I call a government official, almost, to say to me, come down to my office and I'll show you the paperwork, that just doesn't happen anymore. It's file FOIA. That way they can kind of control what they give you. That's changed a lot. And the other thing is, I think what they call investigative reporting now a lot of times deals with databases and FOIA. That's how they get their information.
FOIA.
I'm sorry, freedom of information.
Oh, that,
So,
okay.
yeah.
I know,
Sorry.
only know it by all the words.
No, my wife accuses me of using too much jargon, so I'll try to watch.
You're good.
But yeah, that's what is largely used rather than, direct interviews. And I am very old fashioned that way. I'd still rather talk to people directly. When I was back there looking at the paperwork with the auditor, I could ask him questions about it. Well, what does this mean? What does that mean? Now I get a response back, a freedom of information response, and I'm sorting through it. Just last year, I was doing a lot of work for the Tribune on the Republican gubernatorial campaign because the mayor of Aurora was one of the candidates.
That's right.
And so I was getting, Freedom of Information Act stuff all the time and going through it and trying to figure out, what does this mean? What does this mean?
Did you have to file requests for all that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
have to
you
file
do.
for it.
Yes.
And they give, there's a time lag. It's not great for a daily reporter because they have 5 days to respond, and then they can ask for more time. And so, yeah, I would say it's more cumbersome. It's harder now. I still prefer interviews. I loved it when I used to be able to go down there and get the paperwork and talk to the person right away and say, what does this mean? What does this mean? You know, that kind of
Yes.
thing. So, yeah, it's a lot different.
It's probably important too, to actually know what the form looks like and where things go and so on.
I have a question. I noticed in the city, like some of these hyper local sites, I just read them like Block Club and stuff. They really read what's going on Facebook and social media, and that's how they source a lot of their stories. Is that common? I mean, I always was like a feature writer, and but you see stuff that people post and go, that's a story, I'm gonna go.
It's common. I generally don't do it, but I'm a dinosaur, remember?
Yeah, right.
So we have younger staffers, a couple of younger staffers. We don't have that many staffers anymore. And they honestly, they keep track of more of the social media for me. I mean, I'm barely on Facebook. I was forced onto Twitter by the Tribune. So I don't use it that much, but I get, they'll send me notes and say, hey, I saw this, which is, it's helpful. It's another way to do it. But yeah, that's kind of a controversy in the business right now about quoting directly from Facebook.
Yeah.
I generally do not do that. I will try to get a hold of the person and say, did you really mean to post this? What does this mean? Or try to get a statement if I can. But you know how it is. At daily journalism, when you're on deadline, sometimes you get desperate and you'll say, okay, I'll take it. But
Yeah.
so
Donna, did you do research? Oh. For the, yes, how did you did that?
All the time. Well,
You did it online, right? Mostly?
had great librarians at the Sun and at the Beacon. So Lori Kagan was our librarian at the Sun, and Tricia was at the Beacon. So sometimes when I needed information on a story, I would go to them, or I would go to Nichols Library, because we have fabulous librarians here. And so I would ask them. And I remember one of the first stories I did was on a TIP district for John Russell. And I had no idea what that was. And we didn't have the internet back then, so we couldn't look it up. So John had to walk me through it. He was a really great editor.
Okay. Do you have any trouble with sources, people who don't want to talk these days? Because they're
Sure.
afraid of what's going to happen. I mean, they've always been nervous about, people are always somewhat nervous about their public persona. But it seems to me that, well, if I were still a teacher, I would be terrified to say anything. Because you never know. I read the Chronicle of Higher Ed all of the time, and I read these stories about, and this is professors who are really also threatened. So anyway, that's the thing. So what about your sources? Is that your willingness to?
I think it's always been the case that one of the true skills of a journalist that you have to learn is how to, you're basically trying to get people to tell you things they're not predisposed to tell you. And you're trying to get it in a short amount of time. And, so you can use it, and in a way you can use it. So it's always been kind of a challenge. The one thing I've noticed more than ever now is that, the newspaper for years in the Beacon News, not just in Aurora, but in a lot of the cities we covered, we were one of the first places people came. We're not anymore. Now they go to social media. They, even like professional PR people, I can't tell you how many times I get a news release on a Monday or a Tuesday for something that happens on a Wednesday. And I get this and I say, what do they expect me to do here? But it's because they've already posted it online, and some people don't even think the newspaper is necessary for that anymore. They say, well, we can do everything through, the social media. So that's kind of the challenge now is, and I guess I'm making the argument for keeping up more on social media than I do, but that's a challenge, I think.
You didn't have much trouble with sourcing, did you, Donna? Or did you?
A lot of work.
Oh,
When I was an education reporter, I had a really great relationship with the administrators. So if there was an issue that I didn't understand or that I had questions about, I was able to reach out to them and they would respond.
They trusted you.
Yes, I think so. But no, I had a great relationship with them and they were just wonderful to work with. So it was really nice working for the Sun back then.
So now I have just a quick question. Is it
No.
harder? We were talking about this before the event. With fake news and where the sources are coming from, is it harder to cultivate a source? I mean, do people trust you, or you've been in it a long time? Is it harder to gain someone's trust than it was when you started?
Well, you know, overall, in a general sense, yes, I would say so. It kind of depends on who you're talking to. I noticed in this latest election round, and this is barely since 2020, there were a lot of candidates who don't even respond to forums.
Yeah.
They don't respond to our questionnaires. They don't want to do it. They're purposely not doing it. And so, yes, it becomes a little more difficult in that regard. And I said, I think there's kind of a general feeling that newspapers aren't as relevant anymore. And so they'll just take it, they can take their message right to social media and nobody tampers with it, you know, they don't do anything with it. They don't ask any pesky questions. And so,
I mean, the thing in the book, in these small towns, you know, like in Hillsborough, down by about an hour north of St. Louis, I mean, these guys are everywhere. I mean, they're part of the community. So they're in church. I mean, it's a small town. It's
Right.
like 7,000 to 8,000 people, but they're in the bar, they're in the restaurant, they're in the diner, and that really helps cultivate the trust. And in bigger
Yeah.
cities, of course, that's harder.
It's harder.
Yeah.
Except, one of the things in his book that is connected to all of this, there's a publisher in Little Rock, Arkansas, which is not a little town, but he has had to operate somewhat as though he were, because the paper is distributed in every county in Arkansas. It's like the thing. And there, just like used to be, I don't know if it is now, it used to be in Iowa, people in every county probably read the Des Moines Register back when it was really a paper of record and had its own Washington correspondent and column on the front page, you know, and Bill, Bryson, is it? Yeah, I think. Well, you know, his father was a sports writer for them. Anyway, so it was a real paper. My parents always took it to paper. This is tied to the sort of, anyway. My parents took the Waterloo paper and the Mason City paper, so I didn't read it. I read the Register at school. And that's where I discovered Fletcher Nebel, who wrote 7 Days in May, which became somewhat more current during the term of the former president. Anyway, this Mr. Hussman brought up the notion of the Little Rock guy of truth. He approached a reporter, an international reporter, and he asked her about something, if it was what she said was the truth. And she said, well, she didn't worry about that. She said, it's important to tell what you know. The subjectivity thing is no longer a goal, at least for a good number of journalists. Involving yourself in the story and telling your side of it is practically required. And social media probably has something to do with that. What do you think about truth in journalism these days, Donna?
Well, I think journalism has changed a lot since the days of Harold and Eva White when they owned the Sun. I mean, it's so much different now. It's light years different. Back when I first started, when I got out of school, the newspapers, it was such a physical thing to put a newspaper together. You know, they would typeset it and they would paste it down and then they take a picture of it. So, and now everything is done electronically. So it's so different than it was back then. And when I worked at the Downers Grove Reporter, they had the presses upstairs. The reporters were in the basement and the designers, but the presses were upstairs. So when we put the paper to bed, we would hear the presses rolling. And it's almost like a visceral feeling to that. And I know you probably had that too when you were at the Beacon and the presses were there.
Yeah.
But you know, I just wanted to talk real briefly about local newspapers, local ownership of the newspaper, because I wanted to give a shout out to Stephanie Pennick. So she started Positively Naperville in 2001. And she's just amazing. She's totally hyper local. But what that means, and as you had pointed out in the book, Dave, is they're at every parade. They're at every special event. They're at every banquet. She also has columnists and who help her out. But it's totally locally controlled, and the name says it all, Positively Naperville. And she was so kind to give us a mention, you know, in her newspaper too. So because we're local.
Yes.
Yeah, one of the elevator pitches is, I went down to Hillsborough a lot, and one of the editor told me one of the first visits was, you know, if someone comes in with a picture of the biggest mushroom they grew, that's news, you know. And some of us might, you know, laugh at that or be cynical about it, but it's because if it's important to them, it's important to us. So yeah,
Yeah, there's a lot about that in Dave's book. Speaking of the physicalness of newspapers, the Carroll, Iowa newspaper editor talked about that. And he said that another thing he liked about the physical newspaper is that you sort of sometimes stumble on a story that you really didn't intend to read. There's a sort of it can be an element of surprise, just like there used to be using the card catalog. You would go through the cards and you'd see a book, you say, oh, and you didn't even know about it, and it would be important to you, or it would be fun. And so that's harder that really doesn't happen the same way that it does online, that sense of with the paper, different, there's surprise.
They don't want that to happen online. We all know, any of us who use Google or any search engines, they're watching what you look for, and they are tailoring the message to that. And the same, so yeah, you're right. If you're reading a paper online, there's a good chance you're going to be directed more to the things that you normally write or that you normally read. And so you don't have that same thing as thumbing through a newspaper and seeing a headline and saying, oh my God, what's that? You know, so yeah, you're right. And that's kind of by design, that they don't want to do that. I wanted to mention one thing of what Dave was talking about before, what you guys were talking about, and what you mentioned about how you report a story. I was really lucky in the 90s. I had a chance to take a seminar with one of the best writing coaches in the country at the time. It was a guy named William Blundell, who was a great feature writer and then became a great coach. And one of the things that he said that always stuck with me was, as a reporter, he said, don't be afraid to draw conclusions. He wasn't saying editorialize, but he was basically saying, you are the one there on the ground that experiences what's going on. Don't be afraid to report what you saw. And that, like I said, that stuck with me. That's always been in the back of my mind with every story I've written since then. And I do think I guess to me, it's kind of a good guide to try to walk that line between where are you, you know, the story, or becoming part of the story, or your opinion, versus what you witnessed or what you saw.
I'm sure that's difficult.
Yeah,
You must have had that with all your
we
sources
lean into
too.
that a little bit in the book, but it's almost like fodder for a whole nother book. But you know, what I've always told people is it's hard. Everybody says journalists should be objective. Well, it's hard to be objective because you bring your own baggage, you bring your own stuff into it, but you can be fair and you can show both sides of the story. And that's what I've always tried to do. But there is a real movement, and we talk about that with North Carolina, and University of North Carolina, just a few pages in the book about just putting yourself in you know, like we were talking on the phone the other day, like Tom Wolfe type stuff, putting yourself in every story. And it's hard for me to get you know, if you're doing news, it's hard for me to get my head around that. Yeah.
That was the Hunter Thompson
Yeah,
thing,
right, yeah.
that you
Oh,
are
right,
actually more
exactly.
honest if you if you put your side in the story and you say it from your side, you're actually being more honest that way than this idea of objectivity.
Yeah, right.
And I'm not sure I totally buy that, but I agree with you. I always use the word fair.
Yeah.
I sat across the table from many people I completely and thoroughly disagreed with in my life. And I took down what they said, I took down what somebody else said, and I said, I put it in the paper and the people that read this can decide, you know.
What they think, yes. Yeah, it all really started with actually not newspaper, well, Hunter Thompson was it?
Yeah.
Yeah, was one of the, was a journalist, but Truman Capote's In Cold Blood, he called it nonfiction fiction. And Tom Wolfe wrote The Candy Apple, something about, it was car racing. And then eventually he wrote Bonfire of the Vanities, and he became a novelist by name. But his early work they started using novelistic techniques in the journalism. And I think you can see that in a lot of news stories. I've noticed it when I read on my phone. They often try to get something visual in the first paragraph, which we might not have done, but something that gives a sort of brighter, or something that you really did have to be there to see. So I think it is seeping in. I had somebody today tell me that she reads 3 different things, she gets 3 different versions of the story. I don't know that. I guess, well, it depends. But anyway, it kind of struck me as, the thing is that nobody can be objective, because, like you said, you bring things to it. But you can try to be fair and to try to empathize, I guess is the word.
Yeah.
It's how the other person might feel, or the way they might see it. And that can help, I think, the reporter. I think we sort of started writing, all of us, and I would include my husband, who was a J student in the era of really excellent journalism and journalism teaching. And I don't know what they do nowadays.
You know, with
but
us, we were all coming in the end, or maybe the height of the whole, All the President's Men, the Woodward. It was sexy to be a journalist. you know?
Yes, yes,
That's
it
why.
was.
Yeah.
Look at us.
That was our era.
Yeah, but really, I mean, you go back to it, like guys like Royko and stuff. It was really a blue collar. It was really a gritty thing, and then it got glamorized. Becoming a journalist really got glamorized.
Yes, it did.
Yeah.
Well, you also started at a time, and I started working with you at a time when, well, Tinker, the legal case about the black armbands to protest the Vietnam War, the students in one of the Des Moines high schools wore them, and they were, I think, suspended. And it went to the court, and the decision was that the teenagers had the right to express their opinion. So it sort of gave children and young people the rights that sometimes nowadays some adults don't really want them to have. They aren't supposed to choose what they can read, and we're supposed to, anyway, all of that stuff. So the Tinker thing was a really important decision for newspapers in those days, and for us. I remember we called probably Donna did it, because she has, you can tell, she has this wonderful approach to things and calm. And NAACP, I think, was something about dress and gym. I don't remember. But anyway, it was an exciting time. And there were lots of issues that we're facing now that were very prominent then. The right to speech, and who has the right to speech, and how far you should go, and when should you protest, and when does that go into that, all of those issues. If you go back and read it in the 60s, it's just amazing I've forgotten until recently when I was doing some of that, how scary it actually was sometimes when you read, especially in the late 60s. Go ahead.
I don't want to slip, I want to make sure you get credit for letting us do all these like wild things. I mean, we were writing about stuff in the community when most school newspapers were, well, we did write about wrestling. But, I mean, we were not a mouthpiece by the administration by no means. And that's why we got some of these awards and stuff like that, because you gave us and I know we got in trouble, but I really wanted to make that a cornerstone of what we're doing here tonight. You really gave us the opportunity to find our voices and really,
Did you find that picture of you and I?
I didn't find that one, but Donna found something.
Oh,
But can you talk about the St. Charles story? Yeah, this is, I didn't know, I forgot about this story.
I was thinking about it, and there was an administrator who left Naperville Central to go to St. Charles. And we thought we should cover the story and talk to his college at St. Charles and to see what they thought about him and everything. And in retrospect, now being an education reporter and thinking about that, I'm like, that poor man, he was just trying to do his job. But we did the story, and we might have said some things in there that were aggravating. And so Dr. Matka, who was the principal, called us into the office. So, and that's what I remember.
That's the condensed version. He
wrote a letter to us and called us. We were dabbling in fifth column work. I mean, it's not quite that subversive.
But I can't understate how important that was we're just a bunch of kids and you really gave us the confidence to explore journalism in that way. It was great. Anyway.
well, I was just going to say, first of all, talking about being in Dr. Matka's office, on an issue that was not related to journalism, it was back when we were doing the walk-in center stuff. We had this benefit plan for the walk-in center, and Matka called us in the day before and told us he was going to cancel it. And I kid you not, the two of us sitting there, he started to go over the desk to him.
No,
I see him get up like this. He was so furious, and I was like, "No!" And I grabbed him, and then we sat down. I mean, that was a tense moment, and
I had some issues.
Oh, that was. But I was going to mention. I said I was going to bring this one up.
Sure.
We would, to do the newspaper. We were in the newspaper office a lot. And that kind of meant hanging around the English office too. And so apparently someone in the English office, I don't know, or I think this came down from Dr. Matka, in fact, at the time, said that people were using the mimeograph machine too much. So you had to get written permission to use the mimeograph machine. Well, since we were on the paper, we got written permission to do it. And not only that, we took a photo of Dave and I standing in front of the mimeograph machine, holding up the paper. And I remember we ran it on the front page and it said something like, Dave Hoekstra and Steve Lord of Smoke Signals proudly display the written permission they received from, and I'm really amazed you let us get away with that. Because I'm sure you didn't take that well.
Well, we covered politics too. And we were lucky, some of you may remember Representative Glenn Schneider, who also taught at Naperville North. He's first at Central. Oh, he was one of the Naperville 5. Oh, well, that's a whole other story. Laura, you would remember that time. Yeah. Anyway, you do, and oh, I've lost sorry, I've had this. Glenn Schneider. He was running, and since he was a teacher, he was a story, we thought. And it was also unusual for a teacher to run for office. And he did, first time he did, it was when they were redoing the Constitution. And that was the first year I think I did the paper. That was with you.
Yes,
there was somebody named Steve who was very political, who did a lot of the gathering then. But later on, Glenn ran for state representative and then they had that different kind of apportionment. So he won and served and the school district had to let him be away from school in order to do his service. But that gave us a real political edge to work from and an impetus to be interested. So I know we covered Glenn's campaigns. Dave doesn't tell you this, but his tie to Mike Royko with a person called the Fox. It was a conservation and environmental issue way back at what, 72?
Yeah, well,
73?
and yeah, and we both went on to cover the Fox in our adult lives, but again, we got involved probably across the line.
Okay, do I tell this story too?
Where we were.
He did an interview with the Fox and.
No one knew who the
Right,
Fox
way ahead of
was,
time.
except Mike Royko.
Yeah, well, and Charlie Ward at the meeting.
And then David and Steve.
Well, we didn't know who he was. We talked to him on the phone and he used
Oh.
one of these harmonizers that disguised his voice. And somewhere in that conversation, we mentioned that it was amazing to us that through this entire Naperville Central campus, they didn't have any waste paper baskets outside. And he says, oh, I can get you some of those. He says, I'll drop them off in the morning. I'll drop them off. And we thought, we put a couple of things, little like outdoor waste baskets. We show up at where the buses are supposed to be coming shortly. And what did he drop off? About 14 or 15 of these big industrial barrels that had been painted with the Fox logo on it. And we're looking like, so we took them around the campus as much as we could. And we had a few left over. So we actually rolled them into downtown Naperville, which, by the way, oddly enough, did not have any waste paper baskets for trash downtown at the time. So we placed them through downtown and left. We said, oh, this is a good way to get rid of them. They can use these. So when the sun comes out on Thursday, big headline, Pollution Crusader Fox strikes in downtown Naperville. And we just looked at him and went, oh, no. But as it turns out, we were sort of unwitting helpers of the Fox, and he had a lot of those. But yeah, that was all because of that story.
We went to that year, that was a presidential year when you were a senior. And we went to McGovern rally. There was one, it's the only one I have ever gone to. So I have to thank you all for wanting to go. And it was very exciting. He was late, of course, and of course he lost big. But it was a very exciting thing to go to, and really because of the students who were interested in things like that and were willing to give up their evening to go and do it.
And it was, it was a great staff. Mark Ibach's here, okay? Mark was
Yes.
on the paper. He went and did a sports column for the Naperville Sun. What was it called? On the Mark. Yeah. And then Larry Ulrich. It was just Becky, Roger Green, he's, I don't know if he's named me, but it was just really, really just a fun group of people to work with. And you let us have fun.
Well,
Yes.
I didn't know, you didn't do anything that I figured would get me into trouble. Everyone was much more relaxed then. And the English office was very open, and we smoked in the English office and nobody thought a thing of it. It was, and we talked and we laughed. That changed over the years because we had more students and we all had 5 classes, and it began to be really, really an intense kind of thing. It wasn't like it is now. It was never that bad as I imagine it is now. But there was a very open feeling, and part of it was due to our chairman. But anyway, we had the first Earth Day. Larry, you would remember that. The first one was your senior year, I think.
Because I remember
Yeah.
your predecessor, you really did change it.
What?
The newspaper.
Oh, well, I did.
It was generational change.
It was, because I was much younger. I mean, I was very young, then barely older than they were. So that worked out. This local ownership thing, I was wondering if any of you have any stories about local newspapers and news experiences that you would like to share with us, or any questions that you have that you'd like to bring up now. No?
I'll break the ice.
Thank you,
Do you
dear.
want me to lock the microphone? Like a talk show host?
No, it's gonna be on TV. So, my name is Marianne Curtis. I am a 1965 graduate of NCHS. And I think a lot changed from then to the time that you all were there. So after I graduated, I went on from there. Long story for all of us, right? We're now in our 70s. But I lived in Seattle, lived in Los Angeles, traveled internationally, lived in Taiwan. Anyway,
I'm gonna use
long
this
story
microphone
short,
for
I
them.
moved back to Naperville 3 years ago during COVID. And I do want to put a shout out to the Naperville Sun. Okay, it's not what it was. It's not what it was then. But what I find so important about local news is that you can find out what your public officials are doing. And it's very important to know. I've gone down to City Hall to make statements around the need for housing. They keep promising we're gonna have housing. Well, where is it for the low paid senior citizens, et cetera? So I came to your presentation tonight because, I have some history in journalism, but it is with a socialist feminist newspaper called the Freedom Socialist. Now in Naperville, it's pretty much, you got Republicans, you got Democrats, but little is talked about in terms of those who lean, especially to the left. So I appreciate this. And I think just independent newspapers from the standpoint of the small papers, I read the Aurora paper, The Voice, learn a lot about Aurora. And I think there's a difference between that kind of paper and the Sun and Positively Naperville, which Positively Naperville basically has kind of one point of view. And I find it frankly to be anti-labor, anti-union, and anti-certain things. Anyway, I'm going to stop here. My question is, what do you see for the community newspapers? I think the Naperville Sun now only has maybe one full-time reporter, Suzanne Baker. So would you advocate for the community to try to support having more full-time reporters, that kind of thing? Because I think they're essential. That's all. That was to break the ice. I hope we didn't talk too much.
No, that's good.
I'm glad you
Thank you.
talked about the Sun and Harold and Harold White and his wife, because they were very kind to us the first year I was here and let us do the makeup and the layout in their office. And so there was between the Naperville Teachers Union, which wasn't a union, an association anyway, and the Sun, there was always a lot of tension because Mr. White did not see the goals of some of the goals that the teachers had in quite the same way. So, but it was a very good of a community newspaper that cared so much and that took, time to cover us so thoroughly and to take care of us. And so I still look in the Sun about who got picked up, the police report. They did stop doing a map where they would point out where the different accidents and occasions with the lock appeared. So but it is those are the kind of things in a local newspaper that resonate with people and make them want to read.
I can answer your question, and I don't know, this is my company, so maybe I'll get in trouble for this and it'll hasten my retirement date, but the Naperville Sun and the Beacon News are really the only thing that's really left of them are the nameplates. I don't really know that they possess anything of value anymore beyond that. I mean, I've worked at the Beacon News for 45 years, but I am technically a Tribune reporter. And in theory, they could call me tomorrow and say, go to Tinley Park, you know, you start to cover Tinley Park, in which I would say, well, I retire then, because that's it for me. But it is lost its local. There's no local office. We don't have a local office with the Beacon. I work at home most of the time. I go to coffee shops in Aurora and hang out there once in a while. Well, not more than once in a while. I try to get there, but that's my going out in the community. And then I go to meetings live too. It is, I think it's a big loss. You should have, you know, that's one of the things I love about reading Dave's book, with all these papers, these small town papers that still have offices, and the offices are active places. I love that. I think it's Hillsborough, where they have the office and a coffee shop. Yeah.
Marfa, Texas.
That's in
And-
Texas.
Texas.
Marfa, that's where,
Oh, that's
that's
Marfa.
also a really arty place.
Yeah. That's a brilliant idea, because it's made the newspaper a hangout place for people and in the community. And I think that's a great idea. I wish we could do more of that. At one point, I actually thought about putting something in this paper saying out, you know, like a little schedule of what coffee houses I would be at for people to come.
That's a good idea.
Well, it's a good idea, but then I thought, I don't know, what am I gonna get? So
Meet all kinds of.
it might be unintended consequences. But I run into a lot of people, and oddly enough, this is a very common way that journalists work now, but I was doing it just through weird circumstances way before COVID, and way, you know, this goes back into when I was, the second time I covered Kane County Board. I found a coffee shop right around the corner from the county office, and I started hanging out there and started seeing that all the people on break that worked at the county were coming over there on their breaks. And I thought, oh, this is great. They're just coming to me. So I'd sit in there working, and I go up and talk, hey, how you doing? And so it was kind of like I was in their break room. It was weird, but that's kind of how I started working there. And I told my boss, I said, I live in Geneva. I'm covering stuff in Geneva. I don't really see any point in me driving down to Aurora much anymore. And he'd say, yeah, that's right. You should just stay up there. So I just kind of became this mobile journalist without realizing what it was. But like I said, I think this loss of office is not a good thing. Talk more about the
Well,
Texas thing, because that.
A couple things. I mean, it's obvious. I mean, these small towns don't have, and Steve and I have gone through this. I went through it at the Sun Times. They don't have the stockholders. They don't have the big eye on the money that they do at the you know, the small towns. Again, one big elevator thing I heard was it was in Hillsborough. It said, you know, if we make $1 at the end of the year, we've had a good year. You know, I never would have heard that at the Sun Times. Never would have heard that at the Sun Times.
Yeah. I'll be
And-
stunned if my boss.
Yeah. But I have a section in the book, I haven't talked about the book that much, but there's a section in the book about just the future and having fun. This is not an ode to the end of the newspaper world. I mean, you got to think outside the box. I think that was another problem with me at the Sun Times. I was always trying to think of crazy ideas. I think they thought I was a little nuts and stuff. But I mean, we talked about the iPad. You know, there's the guy in Arkansas. He killed a whole physical newspaper over by Blytheville, Arkansas, and he gave the readers iPads. He gave them free iPads, and they learned how to.
And trained them.
Yeah, and they trained them.
My friend was one of those.
Yeah, and you know, there's a really funny story about a guy who was like 85 years old. He was all excited to get the iPad,
right.
and he went back to his house and stuff, and it didn't work. And they had like tech people at the Holiday Inn in Blytheville, and turned out he didn't have a Wi-Fi connection in his house. And that's why it didn't work. But that, and then Marfa, Texas, you know, it goes back to the thing I keep talking about: community, sense of place. I mean, here's a young couple from Brooklyn. They're from Brooklyn, like 30 years old, 35 years old. They come and buy this paper in Marfa, Texas. And who does that? I mean, and Marfa is like an artist colony, an artist retreat. They buy it, they open up a gift shop, and they open up a coffee shop, and then the people pay their bills for the paper, and they go have coffee and talk to the editor. So if you really think outside the box, I think there's hope and stuff can happen in the future.
Yes, that's one of the things that he talks about in the book. Well, I picked some things to that I thought were interesting, and you haven't heard him read. I am going to have him read at the end when we close. But anyone have any other questions or want to say anything? Yeah, Pat?
I'm talking as a history and government teacher. Now, what we teach our kids too is a concern about the silo kind of effect, whether in journalism or developing public opinion. And it also reminded me of Steve, when you were talking about they don't want you just to go through the paper and something, catch your eye. And I'm just wondering if the local papers have been able to avoid that more, or the things that are driving us apart. And if you look at Pew Research, you find out that more and more people don't just disagree with each other, they see each other as a threat, and hate one another or whatever. So I'm just, and I know cable news probably started a lot of that. We didn't have to have the same kind of coverage. But what do you think about the small town newspaper?
Let's see if you can handle some of this too, but I just think there's a responsibility for the reader to know where their news is coming from. And we were talking about that before the thing about there's some of these fake political newspapers that are coming out in small towns, and you just have to, especially when you're on the web. I mean, you just have to. I think there's a responsibility for the reader to know where the news is coming from and pay for the news if it's required.
Yeah, I often say social media ends where we started. I mean, somebody can hear something and they throw it up online right away, and there it is for the world to see. Generally speaking, when I would hear something like that, that's where I started. I start checking it out. Is there any truth to this? Is there, start looking for sources that can verify this or whatever before I would even consider going to print. I've always pointed out to people, though, like you say, that's why the bylines always seem to be, for a long time, I thought bylines seem very kind of an ego thing, put my name on this. But then I thought about it later. I go, every time I write a story, they know where it came from. They know it was me. They know my name's on it. They know at the very least they can come back on me and say, where did you get this? And I can hopefully explain it and know. So I think that's an internet thing, that silo effect in particular, but there's anything to do with the phone and computers and all that. So yeah, I don't like it. I mean, there's many things like that I don't like. I'm not sure what I can do about it, but I think that's more of an internet thing, and I do think that newspapers used to try to guard against that. We were always called the gatekeeper. Remember, you learned that term if you went to J school a certain era, the gatekeeper. Well, we're not the gatekeepers anymore. There's no gate. It's just like a giant flood of information out there.
It's the border.
And, I remember the Shaw papers that you mentioned. You talked to the Shaws in the book a lot, and they owned the Chronicle up in the Tri-Cities where I live. And I don't know if they owned it at this time. They had a columnist at the time who was kind of like social media before social media. He'd hear something, bam, he'd write about it. And not only that, he was a columnist, so he'd write it with his opinion on it. And I remember I'd pick that paper up every day and I go, this guy is a libel suit waiting to happen. And sure enough, they got sued. They lost a huge libel suit. It was a Supreme Court Justice Bob Thomas. You might remember him.
Oh,
He used to be
yes, the kicker
for the Bears. And he became a Supreme Court Justice, and he sued them because this guy wrote a rumor he heard about how Thomas became a judge. And he finally got caught, and they had a complete massacre of the staff at the time. They lost a ton of people over that. And so I remember that happening. And I think to myself, he was just, if he's sitting at home now with a computer somewhere, he could probably just do that with little recrimination.
Telling the truth does have consequences. Dave tells a story here about the Carroll, Iowa newspaper. The editor, it's a 4-generation paper. That's the thing that's interesting if you read the book, because these are really like family stories. If you read about Champaign lost its newspaper. I mean, it has one, but the people who owned it for years,
Yeah.
since 1859 or something, had to sell it. So anyway, I did it again.
Oh, Carol.
They discovered that, or he heard, or somebody in the paper, that a policeman, one of the city policemen, was not assaulting, but doing inappropriate things with teenage girls. And this struck him so much that he investigated it, and he spent a lot of time, and there were several stories, and he was very, very careful. This is a small town of about 8,000 in western Iowa. There's nothing else around. I mean, you have to go to Omaha or Sioux City to, there is nothing else around there. And he was sued for libel. First, the police chief tried to get him not to publish it and offered him all sorts of things, sort of, not money, but other things. And he published it anyway. There was a libel suit. The judge said, it's all true. He excused it. He won the suit. But he says part of the problem with their finances now is that they lost so much money, and a lot of it was family money. They lost so much money that they had to
Did it go GoFundMe?
sell it,
Yeah.
I think.
That was
yeah.
me defending the suit.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, the defending it. So there's a real consequence to going against the grain, maybe more than there used to be. I don't know. We've always had libel suits though, so that's nothing that new. Well, I want Dave to read the last part. He sort of sums it up. He called this last section a coda, which for old piano students is comforting. Anyway.
Is this it then?
Well, if
We're about done, right? This would be a nice sign off. Are there any other questions?
Before you read,
Yeah.
can I say one thing about the book? It is a lot, it's a really great book about local journalism, but it's actually, and this is true about all of Dave's books, it's a great history book. It's actually a wonderful collection of historical information about all of these papers that he talked to. And I was thinking of the Champaign, you mentioned the Champaign paper.
Roger.
I had no idea what a character
Yeah.
that whole family, but that woman in particular that owned it. And there's a lot of interesting comments and
That's where Roger
stories.
Ebert started his.
Yeah,
career.
and that's in the book too. So that kind of is a extra interest thing in the book is all the history in it.
Oh, thank you. Thanks.
and all of the about when the paper was formed and sort of what reasons may have
Right.
caused it to be formed in that particular town. And then the whole family business is another theme that really runs through. You could read it in business class because that is a theme in it, as well as some of the others.
And it took a lot of time. I mean, it was 4 years.
Oh,
A lot of
yes.
stuff happened in those 4 years. Yeah,
This
you
is-
had the pandemic, you had
It's-
George Floyd stuff.
It's dense. And there's black newspapers, and there's some information about the Defender,
Right.
which my husband remembers very well. So here, this is part of the
What do you want me to
coda,
read? We haven't rehearsed this.
this part,
This whole thing? Okay.
that whole paper.
Wow, with Hillsborough, okay. Thank you, before I start, thank you all for coming. It was nice. It's nice to see, we've done these and it's just nice to see people interested in newspapers. So, every event we've done, we've had nice crowds and stuff. So thank you very much. Thanks you guys. I think it's just really touching. We're all up here after 50 years. So thank you. And Donna, don't sleep on Donna's cookies back there, right? Although your Aunt Jewel made them. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, again, that's part of community. So thank you. Thanks for stepping up on that. So thanks again. I'll read this, okay?
Yes.
I don't know. Okay. Hillsboro's John Gaylor said, we're the first stop in history. In 20, 30 years, people are going to look at what happened here. So it's important you get everything right. I tell my staff, you have to do this right, but don't expect a lot of pats on the back because I'm not sure, unless it's a controversial issue, that it will be well read. That's what we are here for. Community journalism is reporting in an honest, fair, and open manner about the events that happen in your world. If you do that, that's how communities drive and go. These newspaper mavericks grew up in a world of hedge funds and corporate management. The truth is easier to hear without all that static. And then we discover the humanity in each other. It is a hopeful song of a bird that travels from house to house. As journal news publisher Mike Plunkett said in one of my first visits to Hillsborough, the highest praise he receives is when a reader says the journal news isn't the paper. They tell him it is our paper. A community is only as strong as its community paper. This is not allergy. The visions of these foot soldiers give newspapers hope for tomorrow. This is our world. Pay attention. We can determine how the future is written. Thank you.